Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching Wiki Prime, and this is Infravisioning. Now, usually we speak about topics related to infrastructure. This time, we're speaking about a behemoth of an organization. It spans the length and breadth of this country, and it is one of the largest employers in the world. I'm talking about the Indian Railways. And while this institution has humongous potential, in the recent past, a tragic event has brought to light the need for reforms in the sector. We won't delve too deeply into the event itself because it is being investigated as we speak, but we will talk about where things need to go from the reform point of view from this point on. Joining me to talk about this, as usual, is Vinayak Chatterjee, the founder and managing trustee at the Infravision Foundation. Thanks so much, Vinayak, as always, for taking the time. Not delving too much into this particular incident, which certainly was tragic, but talking about the need for reforms. It's not a new conversation. It has come up periodically over the past 20 years. Where do things stand right now? How much of what has been spoken about over the past 2 decades has so far been done?
It's a very, very broad and often difficult question to answer. In fact, on the recent incident of the accident, it's been a very, very sad event. And as you rightly said, it's not appropriate for us to delve into it right now because there are some parallel investigations happening, and all of us should wait to see the outcome and what lessons it holds. But as you rightly pointed out, Alex, beyond the accident, once again, the focus and discussions have been about what is the institutional future of Indian Railways as a behemoth, as you said. Now, as an aside, I think it would be very instructive for your viewers to know that Indian Railways, is the 8th largest employer in the world. So you very rightfully called it a behemoth. And the question that comes naturally is a question that I'm often asked: who are the other 7? So just as a bit of a lighter aside, the railways employs 1.4 million people, or 14 lakhs. The largest employer, and comes number 8. So number 1 is the United States Department of Defense with 3.2 million, followed by another defense establishment, the People's Liberation Army of China, at 2.3 million. So the two large militaries of the world, US and People's Liberation Army of China at 2.3 million, Walmart at 2.1 million, McDonald's at 1.9, National Health Service of UK 1.7 million, China National Petroleum Corporation 1.6 million, China again, State Grid Corporation of China 1.5 at number 7, and here we are at number 8, Indian Railways, number 8th largest employer in the world with 1.4 million people. And when you're talking, as you rightly said, the network that crisscrosses the length and breadth of the subcontinent with 1.4 million employees and God knows how many people off the roads, it is, shall we say, a natural candidate to face the question: where is the organizational weakness? Are there reforms required? Which directions should the reforms go in terms of organizational reform? So let's spend a little time looking at the weaknesses. The critics of the prevalent Indian Railways organization point out facets like insularity, political interference, silo culture, excessive centralization, resistance to change by the unions, and low productivity of the workforce. These are the standard criticisms of Indian Railways, that it's overstaffed, not enough productivity, etc. At the same time, a balanced view would be that it has certain strengths which are often not recognized. And let me point that out. Indian Railways has a very well-knit cadre of recognized technocrats who are fiercely loyal to the institution, even at the worst of times. Now, you will agree, Alex, that not all public systems or public enterprises have such a well-knit cadre of fiercely loyal technocrat managers. That's the strength of the Indian Railways. Now, therefore, is it all right if I proceed with some of the history of reorganization suggestions, Alex?
So I think we should focus rather on the reform measures that have been suggested so far, because
Yes.
I was reading through a few of the articles that you've written over the past several years, and you have highlighted instances like the Anil Kakodkar committee that spoke about safety. You've highlighted the Devroy committee most recently in 2015 that made certain suggestions. You've highlighted the draft national rail plan. All of these have made suggestions, and the last one, of course, talked about significant investment that is required over the course of 21 to 30 and then beyond all the way to 50. But what do we start with at this juncture, Vinayak? That's the most important point.
So, Alex, you've positioned the discussion well about bringing it to the present. But an interesting facet that I want to point out is that there is actually a common thread running across most of the reports. I have now tracked reports from 2002 onwards and find that the tone and tenor of the recommendations, irrespective of who is chairing the committee, has not changed. So, in fact, the first seminal report was 2002. And that is the Rakesh Mohan Committee report on Indian Railways in February 2002. And it's not vastly different from what is being talked about at present. So across almost 2 decades now, committee after committee are virtually mouthing similar set of recommendations. Now, since the Rakesh Mohan report actually did the preliminary stage study, what did it say? And few can argue against its recommendation. It fundamentally called for a separation of roles into policy, regulatory, and management functions. It suggested that Indian Railways must eventually be corporatized into the Indian Railway Corporation. The government would need to set up an Indian Rail Regulatory Authority, IRRA, which would be necessary to regulate IRC's activities as it is a monopoly supplier of services. And IRC is to be an Indian Railway Corporation in a corporate framework should be governed by a reconstituted Indian Railways Executive Board. And the government of India should not be a part of the executive board, but should only be involved with setting policy direction through its role as in the regulatory authority.
Right.
So, this reconstitution is actually a thread that is being carried forward in reports that have followed the Rakesh Mohan Committee report. For example, in February 2012 came the Sam Pitroda, and I have to make a disclosure here as a member of the SAM Committee report on organizational reforms and modernization, and had the privilege of writing a few chapters. In fact, the Sam Pitroda had the following to say. The report had the following highlight: that organizational reforms are essential to ensure that Indian Railways is able to achieve the goals set out for modernization. The structure of Indian Railways has remained largely unchanged for decades, and it remains a functionally oriented institution that is organized around its cadres instead of around its business or customers. Then comes as you mentioned, then came almost in similar time came the Anil Kakodkar report, February 2012, suggesting a statutory railway safety authority and measures to strengthen the Railway Safety Commission. Now, both the Kakodkar report was seminal in its very clear recommendation to enhance safety governance. And today, with the context of the recent accident that we are speaking about, setting up a statutory Railway Safety Authority and measures to strengthen the Railway Safety Commission now gathers so much more importance and traction. So these discussions have been going on. Now, moving on from 2012, which is the Pitroda Committee and the Kakodkar Committee, we come to February 2014. And that was when I remember Prime Minister Manmohan Singh requested Rakesh Mohan to once again take stock of the India's transport sector. And Rakesh came out with his seminal path-breaking work called the National Transport Development Policy. India, and it's called titled India Transport Report, Moving India to 2032. Now, Fundamentally, it has a lot of detail on railways, but if I were to summarize for you, the report recognized that a pure step up in outlays for rail would be completely infructuous without a parallel commitment to institutional overhaul of the entire railway system. So time and time again, committee after committee is talking about institutional overhaul. And, and therefore, move from 2014, let's come, that was set up, that committee was set up by Manmohan Singh. Now we come to the current dispensation, the NDA. The NDA in 2015 asked Dr. Vivek Devroy, who is now the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Commission, to once again take a look at railway reorganization. And Dr. Vivek Devroy committee came up with a report titled Mobilization of Resources for Major Railway Projects and Restructuring. The report itself had the headline, Restructuring of the Railway Ministry and Railway Board. It once again said many of the same things that the Rakesh Mohan committee and others had said. What did it say? The Vivek Devroy committee says that over the years, the IR organization has grown into an overly centralized and hierarchical organization. The feeling of departmentalism adversely affects the working culture in the railways and has resulted in actions and decisions based on narrow departmental goals instead of organizational objectives or benefits. To address the issues brought out, the committee builds its recommendations on three pillars, namely commercial accounting, changes in human HR design, and an independent regulator. So, as you can see, this whole business of separating policy from execution, of having an independent regulator, having far more focused business entities rather than silos, are repeatedly coming up in committee after committee.
Yeah.
And finally, we come to the latest, which is the 2021 National Rail Plan. Now, the National Rail Plan basically is a perspective about the network of how share of freight and passenger is going to play out, how dedicated freight corridors are going to play out, how congestion in specific nodes of the railway traffic system are going to be eased. It's very much about upgradation of and network management, but it does recognize that there is organization overhaul also required, and it is merely putting capital behind Indian Railways and only looking at financing is not going to win the game. So that's where we are. That's where we are, Alex, and that, in a sense, completes my review of the historical series of committees and recommendations that broadly point to the same direction. So the question really now is the political system convinced of these recommendations? And if they are they going to bite the bullet, and are we going to see some fundamental changes in the way Indian Railways is organized? The jury is out on that, but maybe you have some views on that.
No, I would actually like to hear what you have to say. If there was one thing, and there are several common themes that you've pointed out that these various committees have dealt with, and that one theme that I see is an independent regulator for the Indian Railways.
Yep.
And if there was one thing, therefore, that you say would have to be done right now, as things stand right now, what would that one thing be?
Well, I would actually say two things. I would immediately do a deep dive on the Kakotkar Committee report on safety. And I would set up an independent safety board straight away, which is independent of the railway board and of any interference in their recommendations or reports. And secondly, I would certainly recommend, and this has been talked about for some time, to set up an independent regulatory authority for the railways. That's required not just for a variety of reasons. As you realize, PPP in railways, the ability to attract private capital, hasn't gone too well at all. And for long, people have argued that the people who structure the PPP deals in railways are unable to see the partnership, and the field is always tilted away from the private sector, which is why private sector doesn't respond with great enthusiasm to any of the PPP projects, whether it is DFC or whether it's station privatization or operation of private trains or what have you. It's also important for an independent rail authority to control a regulatory authority to control aspects of pricing, because railways is a monopoly, and all monopolies do require an independent control. Otherwise, they do not have market checks and balances. There is no competition, other than, of course, from road and other stuff. So these are two things which I would recommend straight away. A complete deep dive once again on the Kakotkar Committee report on safety and implementing the suggestions there, and setting up an independent railway regulator for a variety of reasons.
Certainly.
Over to you.
And they have implications, I think, for how the organization as a whole, the institution as a whole is run. I think you've laid things out very nicely, and perhaps our viewers will be able to write to us and kind of give us a sense of what they'd like to hear about next. But thank you so much, Vinayak, for taking the time and for taking us through your reading of the situation.